without question, one of the UK's leading homeopaths. Like me, she's been in practice a very long time and has a huge amount of experience. But Caroline has very much been focused on advocating for women's health, specialising in all sort of aspects of hormone health and supporting women through the menopause. She has some amazing workshops and courses and is just a massive fountain of knowledge. So I don't want to take any more time, Caroline. We're just thrilled to have you here. We hand over and so you can start telling us all how to manage menopause naturally.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I always love talking to you, and we had very parallel times of study, and I'm just going to screen share from a little PowerPoint I've done for today, which kind of just helps visually. I'll go through it all, but if you're watching again, or you're watching for the first time, you've got this visually. And if there's anything here that you just think, just ask Sonia. For what was that bit, but you'll be able to come back and watch this. So I kind of started leading with the phrase managing menopause naturally in 2015, and like Sonia, I've been in practice since 2020. I think, Sonia, you might have graduated the year before me. And we studied at the same college. We studied as homeopaths, and we soon learned that homeopathy is amazing. It's an energy medicine, but the baseline for most people, and this has increased in the last 25 years, our baseline is that we are less well resourced when it comes to things like minerals and nutrition. And that is a challenge for us at menopause. And we tend to focus on the conversation around nutrition, but so much of menopause is actually also looking at lifestyle. So I'm just going to do a little tiny bit of history. First off, it came as a big surprise when I realized this year I'd been qualified for 25 years and I'd been prescribing, thousands and thousands of remedies for 25 years. And obviously that point, 2015, when I started to focus on managing menopause naturally and lead with a workshop in that, as well as other workshops that I was already doing. So I was doing a balancing your hormones workshop and a detox your life workshop. So those are the kind of things that I was getting asked about. And, around that time, we flipped at New Year from wanting to lose weight to wanting to live a cleaner life. So that message that had been going on about detox, about looking after ourselves better, really came through. And that's really interesting. That is a key moment when people generally focused on wanting to live a healthier lifestyle for their New Year resolutions. And so there's a really interesting shift that began to take place in 2012 in the way that we look at our lives. And you might look back at your life and think, do you know what? Yeah, that also was me too. So while I'd looked at detox, while I'd looked at hormonal health, I hadn't really focused specifically on menopause. And I was actually going through my own menopause at that point. I am about 11 and a half years the other side of menopause now. And at that point, 10 years ago, I was really winding up my fertile life. But the story had started far earlier, and we're going to touch into that a bit today. So just to kind of explain my journey, and also something that I've been talking about in the natural menopause course that I run, which is a 6-week course, and I run that with a colleague. We're talking this week on the course about detox and how important it is to let go of what is held in the body at menopause, because that is what will trip us up. So there's one woman in the group who has some breast pathology. She has cysts in the breast. Now, from a hormonal health perspective, we are looking at the need to detox in the liver, because quite simply, the liver is doing more work at menopause and it's breaking down more the hormones. It's trying to shed of any synthetic hormones that are interfering with our health. And my take on it is that our primary disturbances at menopause are synthetic hormones in our own timeline. So when we open the course and when we open a case talking to somebody about their health in general, but especially with menopause, we need to know the hormonal health throughout someone's lifetime. We need to know the points at which there were some significant changes. So going back, looking at that and learning where we need to look after ourselves and develop some self-care is really key at menopause. And that might be time for yourself. It might be looking at detox protocols. It might be adding something in. So my background was fine art textiles, and then I moved into press and PR for natural parenting. And so these were my kind of tools that I brought to being a homeopath. And in fact, I've always been self-employed. So the PR bit serves, growing my practice and that kind of thing. And I also have a background with permaculture, which is looking at sustainable systems in agriculture. But I apply those perspectives about sustainable systems to helping my clients create a roadmap for menopause. And you need something that's sustainable. You need something that you implement slowly over time. And so, this is why we developed a 6-week course, so that by the end of it, it was clear what is the roadmap that you need for menopause. And there are lots of different ways you can do that. But understanding that we come back to certain things that I'm going to mention today again and again. Even now, 11 years post menopause, I need to remind myself to get magnesium into my life, for instance. So I'm in a few different places. I'm quite a busy person, and I'm trying to bring out Menopause Without Mayhem podcast. So that's kind of being lined up, and I'm in various other places. You can see here, it's Instagram, YouTube. I've got lots of free stuff on YouTube. But let's look at menopause and its timeline. And allegedly, Aristotle referred to the age of menopause as being 40 years. And the average age at menopause is higher in the West compared to developing countries, and India, where it's supposed to be 45 to 46. Now, statistics like this might change a bit over time, but the average age in the UK is 51. And I was a total average, size 12, size 5 shoes, 38 if you're in Europe, and an average age menopause at 51. I do see, and this is quite interesting to me, that my clients in Italy and Spain quite often have their menopause a few years later. And it is noted that they don't use synthetic hormones, the birth control pill, as much as we do here, because they're primarily Roman Catholic countries and that was not encouraged. Of course, that could be changing again over time, but that's just something that I've noted in practice. And that's what we call clinical information. When we do a study, it's done very carefully, and we need to look at who's doing the study and actually what's extracted from the study. But in 2006, a study in rural Turkey found that 44.5 was the average age of menopause. So that's Eastern Mediterranean. What's happening in rural Turkey and what's happening in our country? Why might it be that menopause is extended in our world and not at the other end of the Mediterranean? So these are the kind of things that I'm always questioning. And a French physician coined the term menopause in 1821. And that kind of interest in menopause increased in the mid-19th century. When I look at that time, what I observe is that people retreated even more into their houses, that Victorians took plants into their houses and began to live an indoor life and saw less light. And we all know this when we look at things like, we look at how young children were when they went into the factories in the Industrial Revolution. And that time, again, was a key turning point in our overall health, a point when we turned from looking at what it is that allows us to be healthy, and the Victorians would have said a walk outside, taking a constitutional walk, that is, not drinking alcohol, living a more temperate lifestyle. And then we switch into the 20th century, and Freud came along and said, it's all your fault. It's all mental, emotional. So we kind of ignored for the whole of the 20th century all the things that were creeping in. the medicalization of our lives, the chemicals, the pollutants, all the things that we teach women to let go of at menopause, because they will aggravate your symptoms. So by the 1930s, menopause began to be described as a deficiency disease. And while there's part of me that doesn't like that term, it is actually true that we have become more deficient in our nutrients. It's not about the hormones, it's about the terrain, the background, the story. And yes, there are changes in our hormones. We're letting go of what it means to be fertile, the amount of hormones in our system that we need to try to be fertile, or to be fertile, whatever our personal story was, to being on an even keel post menopause of having smaller amounts of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, etc. We still need those hormones. We just don't need as much because we're trying to make babies. That adjustment to having less is a harder journey for us because of everything that went on in the 20th century and everything that is beginning to go on in this century. So I'm not going to talk about that too much now, but understanding that a lot of this is clearing clutter out of our lives in terms of environment and cleansing, detoxing, eating cleaner foods, that kind of things. So menopausal symptoms were ascribed to estrogen deficiency, and HRT was promoted as the ultimate liberation of middle-aged women, and estrogen sales tripled in the USA. Sadly, what happened in the 19th century, in the 1970s, was that only estrogen was given, and that is very dangerous. So if you're on HRT and you haven't got some kind of progesterone in the mix, you need it, even if it is a natural progesterone cream that you're using alongside something like estrogel, for instance. We should not be using estrogen on its own, and that is not yet understood by our MDs and GPs. Really important. So this is why we have these increase in cancers in estrogen users. And by the 21st century, 15 million women in the US were using estrogen therapy with or out progestins, some kind of progesterone. Progesterone is a beautiful buffer. So this 2005 Bangkok study found that the most common and most severe menopausal symptom was muscle and joint pains. So we begin to see different things happening in different demographics, in different places in the world, in different heritage for women. So, I would say in my Afro-Caribbean clients, I'm usually looking at high cholesterol, high blood pressure. We don't get so many women coming through with joint muscle pains in the UK. It's not the leading symptom. Might be there, might be transitory, of course. All of this is transitory, and we can support it really well with our natural solutions. So at any one time, it's said there are 13 million menopausal women in the UK. Certainly, we're all going to go through it at some stage. And 60% of women experience some kind of behavioral change. 1 in 4 are debilitated by their symptoms, and only 38% seek advice from their GP. Now, that I think is an old statistic now. I think we're waking up to what the symptoms are. And I said just before we came on air that, in the UK, doctors are going to be issued with a kind of menopause checklist, which is fabulous. Even if the doctors are always going to prescribe HRT and not the natural approach, at least women are going to be aware of their symptoms and that their symptoms might be menopause. And again, I think this is an old statistic. A third of menopausal women experience anxiety. I certainly had surges of anxiety that were just unprecedented. I'd never really had anything like that before. And that can come as quite a shock when we've got these changes on a mental, emotional level, as well as a physical level. So let's take a closer look at the female journey and the stages of menopause. So I love it when women who are pre-menopause come in asking questions, and we're beginning to see more women doing this. And it might be that there's a particular condition that a woman is concerned about entering menopause with and she wants support with, or it might simply be, older friends, sisters, family going through menopause and thinking, wonder if there's anything I can do now. And there is. Then we have perimenopause, which, we're now talking about early perimenopause and late perimenopause. I've gone through a long period of time of calling it perimenopause and true menopause. So we've got this time when symptoms begin to change, and I'm going to outline a few of those for you. And then in that last, you know, average 18 months when symptoms really ramp up, and we're calling it either late perimenopause or true menopause, symptoms really ramp up. And again, I'll look at those symptoms in a minute. And we are then saying, look, things are really changing. Some of these symptoms are really bugging me. And we're moving through to the stage where we haven't had periods for 12 months and we're truly post-menopause. And I always mention this, which has been called various things, but POI is its current name, premature ovarian insufficiency. So if a woman's ovaries have failed, basically, earlier in her life or never really got going, she's going to be in a post-menopause state for much longer than we are designed to be. So she's going to need all the post-menopause supports for the whole of the rest of her life, for longer than, for instance, me. So the average time that we've got post-menopause, if our menopause is 51, is something like 30 years. So during that time, we need to look after ourselves just as much. And once you're through menopause, you're looking at putting in, like I say, a roadmap for the post-menopausal period, and being aware that, we'll come on to this in a minute. I'll remember to mention this, but the early perimenopause signs for many women are subtle changes in their periods. The bleed gets longer or shorter, the cycle gets longer or shorter. Or I spoke to a client yesterday who realized that she misses a whole cycle when she goes through periods of stress. And what that shows me is that the cortisol is utilizing the building blocks for progesterone. And that happens. It's also utilizing the building blocks for testosterone. Interestingly, women need that too. So her irregularity is amenorrhea. She misses one cycle. And that is not necessarily it is a very, very early sign that things could be changing. If she stayed in the stress, would she have an early menopause? So I'm just using that as an example. I hope that remedies and a few little tweaks will get her back on track, as they have done before, and she learns to manage stress better. So mood swings, mood changes, and these are all really down to irregular blood sugar. So all of these things can go together. Irregular blood sugar. My first sign at 42 was I felt rangy. I felt disconnected. I felt almost slightly dizzy. And that was my blood sugar being a bit irregular. And when I look back through my timeline, I was a real sugar addict in my childhood and into my teens. Fasting, for instance, might not suit you at this time. So I love intermittent fasting, absolutely fine with it post-menopause. But during my fertile years, it was quite difficult for me to truly cleanse, because I didn't know how to manage my blood sugar when cleansing. And there are some amazing tools for that, but they've really only come through in the last 10 to 12 years. Gradual weight gain, really, one of the most annoying symptoms, because in spite of eating well, you might find that you've got gradual weight gain going on, and that shows estrogen dominance and potentially a low thyroid. So there's lots we can do. And hair loss, again, this was something that my client mentioned. I go through these periods of stress, I miss a period, and I realize I'm losing hair. So I'm like, okay, this is where we need to be prescribing. How different is that from a woman who's got joint aches and pains? Do we have the same solution? No, there is no one size fits all, although HRT would have us believe that. So we need to listen to how it is for us. So true menopause or late perimenopause, this is when we ramp into the hot flushes, things like the memory loss, the brain fog, our periods perhaps getting heavier, headaches before or with the period, digestive issues, sleep issues. Another one that I would put in here that I see increasingly is allergies, and potentially things like conditions like mast cell activation syndrome. So there could be more serious things going on. heart palpitations, for instance, showing us that we need to attend to a particular organ or system in the body. So post-menopause, I love this lady with her blue eyeshadow and her blouse. She's so bold. Post-menopause, as I've said, we live many years beyond menopause. And in fact, when you do the maths, a third of our working life is beyond menopause. So if you're in the corporate space, is your organization supporting and funding women through menopause? I'm speaking to one of our largest public sectors about doing a talk on menopause across 2 counties of this public sector. They have no money for menopause, no support for women in their workforce who are going to be working till they're 67. I was genuinely shocked. They want me to do it for free because my sister's working there. I was like, of course I'll do it. And now I'm like asking a lot of questions. How many women am I speaking to? I just thought I was talking to her office, but I've got a message from 2 counties saying we've got no finance, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I can work for free because it's my sister. But, being realistic, where are my boundaries around that? So we need post-menopause to continue to look after our boundaries, certainly. But I always say our bones, our bladder, our brain, and also our heart. How do we support ourselves beyond menopause? And a really interesting study, I did say in my info somewhere that I would share some studies. So this is an archaeological study. So they did DEXA scans. These measure the bone mass or density on 28 female skeletons from Spitalfields, which is an area in East London. The women were aged between 24 and 96 at death. I'm just going to say that again, 96. They were exhumed from the 18th and 19th century. So when we're told that women in an earlier time had their menopauses earlier because they didn't live as long, it's absolutely untrue. Our average age is measured on an overall survival rate of the population. And at this point in time, the survival rate of the population was low because there was a lot of child and infant deaths because of poverty, because of this change, this shift, into an indoor lifestyle. So the average age of deaths, the average age of menopause is a statistic that we need to look into. Just thought I'd pop that in there. But basically, these skeletons were compared to 25 modern pre and postmenopausal women from a UK clinical database. So that's measured in the doctor's surgery or the hospital. And the Spitalfields women exhibited a higher peak bone mass density in early adulthood and slower age-related bone loss than modern women. That is totally challenging assumptions that pre-industrial skeletons would show poorer bone health due to hardship. Instead, it highlights the environmental influences on bone mass density. And the researchers at that stage hypothesized that manual labor, nutrient-dense diets with fresh produce supported better bone maintenance, contrasting with modern sedentary habits and nutritional shifts. I would also add environmental toxicity to that's an area that you'll see very little conversation with in the mainstream, because the very last thing we want to know is that Wi-Fi isn't great for us, or whatever else is kind of universal isn't great for us, because that means massive changes to the industry that support how we live now. So we have to individually try to do that. So each menopausal journey differs. And I kind of think it's really worth looking at these 5 categories of symptoms and just knowing that the journey through menopause, so for me, it was 10 years, 42 to 52, will cover conversations around all of these areas, and that it will be different for all of us. And the emphasis of how much time and energy and focus we have on each of these areas will change according to how we move through our lives, things that are always there for us, things that come into our lives that weren't there before, for instance. So, the emotional tone. I often see like a crisis of confidence, depression, mood swings, unexplained anxiety, sensitivity, anger, irritability, self-consciousness. These can come to the fore. How do we support that? Mental, brain fog, focus, concentration, memory, cognitive function. And I do share a case sometimes of a woman who was 60. So she was postmenopausal, and she was worried about her focus. Her mother had dementia, and she went to a GP and did a short test, and it actually came down to anxiety. It wasn't early dementia. And so we explored anxiety in her timeline, and that was where the work needed to be done. So, and we did that with homeopathy. We did that with a very simple everyday remedy, in fact, but it was exploring that led to the prescription. And so I could have gone down a route of, early dementia, but actually it was something else. So there are some amazing tests around. There are some amazing conversations we can have to find out what's going wrong. But just remember that neither your health practitioner, your complementary health practitioner, or your GP was trained in menopause. This is all new. This is all recognizing what it means to be a menopausal woman at this place and time. So we can talk about mental focus, concentration, etc. We can talk about how our sleep, our energy is, our perspiration, dizziness, hair loss, dryness, physical symptoms, unstable blood sugar, etc. And then also there's this, it's called the change traditionally. What is our life's purpose? That might be coming into focus for us. What is it we need to let go of? What is the wisdom that we've attained through our lives that we want to share with other women? So I always talk about it, two hormones that should be friends. So this is me on the right and my daughter on the left when I was going through menopause and she was coming into womanhood. So that was early peri for me at that point. And she was just coming into, I would think, her late teens, early 20s in that photo. So the stars of the show, I call them. Estrogen increases our body fat. So if we've got weight gain, there is too much estrogen going on, and it could be too much synthetic estrogen. And that's where the work needs to be to detox. So estrogen has a function of, it's like, I call it our startup hormone. It's dominant in the first half of our menstrual cycle. It's part of what brings us into being fertile. It starts our periods, when we're in our teens. It starts labor when we're pregnant. It's an initiatory hormone for us. It's about attracting the male. It increases our breast size. So if, like me, you are kind of a bit cheesed off with your breast kind of getting bigger post menopause, that shows that we need to channel our estrogen, our spent estrogen, in a more efficient way. And one of the things we can do for that is to increase consumption of what we call the brassicas, broccoli, kale, cabbages, etc., and maybe eat those 3 times a week to help scavenge the poor estrogen pathways that some of us have. Increasingly, we have that as an issue. So it might be that's part of my roadmap. That's part of my post-menopause. Put sprouting broccoli into my organic fruit and veg delivery, have that 3 times a week. And then there might be herbs or homeopathy that I can also reach to manage excess estrogen in my life. Excess estrogen also comes from things we call xenoestrogens. So things like plastics that we wrap our food in, that we wear on our body, those create an estrogen dominant picture, a chemical estrogen dominant picture. We don't want that. So maybe going over to cotton underwear is part of the conversation. On the flip side, progesterone elevates our mood in a much more buoyant, holistic way than estrogen. Estrogen is a driver. Estrogen elevates our mood to party, go out and capture the male. We're very basic when it comes down to it. So they both have a role in bone density. They both have a role in protecting the brain and the heart. But progesterone increases muscle mass and decreases body fat. So we want more progesterone. It defeats the fibrosis of internal and reproductive organs. So if we've got fibroids, endometriosis, anything going wrong with the period, we need to increase progesterone, and it's dominant in a healthy pregnancy. And, you know, the news that's coming through is women need testosterone too. It's part of our energy, our mood, our concentration, our focus, things like goal setting. So if in menopause we lose, you know, our drive, our interest in the world around us, loss of libido, loss of sex drive, loss of muscle, it influences bone mass. Testosterone is important. It's what gets children moving, or toddlers, babies moving, aged 9 months, gets us moving into the world. It's that, oh, I want that over there hormone. Yeah. So too much imbalance can be skin problems, mood changes, things like male pattern balding, hair growth in unusual places, an in libido imbalance, sometimes increased libido, changes in the menstrual cycle and infertility could point to too much testosterone. So as we've said, things that affect our hormonal balance, nutrient deficiency, things like medication can interfere, the environment, stress, toxicity. These are the areas that we tend to focus on. So with nutrients, it's more about adding in things we need. With medication, it's about being aware of how they make us deficient in certain vitamins and minerals. Even HRT, you know, there are certain minerals and vitamins that we need to add in if we're on HRT. Environment, it might mean that we need protection from Wi-Fi, or removing certain chemicals or workplace toxins from our lives. Household toxins, cleaning products, you know, go over to natural. And stress, often when women are managing more stress issues with older parents, teens taking on extra responsibilities at work. So we need to mitigate these. And then, as I've said, cleansing, detox. So when it comes to sleep, I often say, is it a problem getting to sleep, in which case we need more magnesium in our lives, or is it a problem with staying asleep and waking at weird o'clock? And then we need more melatonin required. Is insomnia an issue you've always had, or is it a new problem? You know, often women report a sense of light sleep or not having slept enough. And so I might check that the thyroid is not working too hard, and that hypothyroid state has a sense of, I really feel like I didn't sleep. We might explore dream life at menopause. That could indicate other organs talking. And I personally like to take my magnesium dermally with a spray, magnesium spray oil, or Epsom salt baths, but you can take a supplement. And, you know, Sonia will tell you there's some herbs which are rich in magnesium that you could take. And that would be a great way to take in plant-sourced nutrients. So getting ready for bed, start first thing in the morning. 5 to 20 minutes outside with the brighter light will help anchor your what we call circadian rhythms. So indoor light is too neutral. There's not enough light indoors to set our pineal gland to producing melatonin at the end of the day. So try and get out at lunchtime. Try not to eat later than 7 p.m. for a good night's sleep. Ideally, go to bed between 9 and 10, and avoid bright lights and the blue screen. You know, 99% of people who had bright lights in the evening had suppressed melatonin, and they had 90 minutes less deep sleep. So even though your sleep's long, if you're not waking refreshed, it shows that your melatonin hasn't allowed you to slip into the deeper sleep. So really try and stop digitals and TV an hour before bedtime. That blue screen and the LED lights, bright lights, are interfering with women's hormonal cycles. New studies out on that. We're seeing women no longer menstruating with the moon. And so the moon is no longer governing the tides of the body. The LED lights are. So sometimes taking a hot shower or bath and then a cold shower before bedtime can be really helpful. Dark room, cover any lights or LED displays, a cooler room. Sleeping naked is better for us. It's better for our circulation and our metabolism. Trying to avoid smart meters. There is conversation that, again, too much Wi-Fi, etc., is interfering with our sleep, and the smart meters pump out a lot of electromagnetic conversation. I slept on a towel for a little while. That really helped. A fan, obviously, and things like relaxing music. This Max Richter's Sleep Symphony was written to get to sleep, and the studies show that people actually slept better and deeper when they listened to it. I think it's about 8 hours long. And Yoga Nidra is lovely. These are specific meditations to fall asleep. So I'm just going to cover very quickly the main food types that I always recommend to add in for every stage of menopause for differing reasons. And I'm just going to show you an interesting study in a minute. So essential fatty acids, we often need more of these. There are particular ones that are useful: flaxseed, hemp seed. These particularly useful for regulating the cycle. Evening primrose, if you've got premenstrual symptoms, for instance, is helpful. Chia seed, pumpkin seed is rich in zinc. So we might kind of focus where we're getting these essential fatty acids from, depending on our particular needs. And then magnesium, the Chinese call the beautiful mineral, and I've mentioned this. It's so important, aiding 80% of processes in the body. We use it up fast when we're stressed through excess sweating. So if you've got hot flushes, definitely need the magnesium. Tea, coffee, alcohol, sugar, all affect magnesium. It's something that we need to replenish on a regular level. And if you're chasing chocolate, it's probably because chocolate, good quality chocolate, has magnesium in it. It's also very iron rich. So, a cacao drink is a much better source of chocolate and might be really helpful late afternoon to help boost your magnesium. And fermented foods. So for many women, diversifying the gut flora really makes for healthy brain chemistry, improves the digestion, could really help with things like allergies that can crop up at menopause, as I've said, supporting the mucous membranes, that kind of thing. So I always get asked this. I can never personally remember the different types of magnesium, but you need to look for taurate for heart and circulatory health, malate for joint health and chronic fatigue, threonate for brain fog, poor focus and concentration, glycinate for headaches, and citrate for a slow bowel. So there it is. You can come back and look at that. I tend to, as I say, go for the magnesium spray oil, plant-sourced magnesium, food and supplements, and maybe an Epsom salt bath. But just be aware that if the supplement is cheap, glycinate and citrate are very cheap to produce. So this is a study that's come out very, very recently, I believe September even, certainly this summer. 3,566 participants in the UK cohort study, and they saw that the natural age of menopause was benefited, so it was later, by the use of fish oil, B complex, antioxidant mixtures, and vitamin C. So all of those things in combination really helped. And then folic acid B9 showed near significance. That means that a large proportion of participants benefited from B9 supplementation. So very interesting. We're getting more studies in menopause, and I'm just going to finish with some homeopathic remedies for menopause. So I am a homeopath, and it's Sonia's background too. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking for. So sepia, these are the most commonly used remedies. There's 4 of them, and they're most commonly used for one emerging reason, which is they all help antidote the effects of synthetic hormones, as well as simply hormonal imbalance. So sepia is this moody, angry, irritable state before the periods, especially with the partner. Menstrual cycles tend to be longer and heavier than they were, or shorter with a sense of congestion. And by that I mean, I feel full, I feel bloated, I wish my period would start. Sepia is a fantastic remedy for loss of libido, hair loss, being a bit hyperactive and better for menopause, better for exercise, better for running, dancing, etc. Pulsatilla is a very different type of remedy, tends to have the very irregular cycle. You don't know how your cycle is going to be from 1 month to the next. The bleeding stops and starts. There's also a tendency to heavier bleeds and painful periods. There might be a history of anemia with pulsatilla. And what we get with pulsatilla is a feeling of low mood, weepy, anxious, surges of anxiety. Can also be a jealous remedy and is always better for talking to friends about it. They'll talk to anybody and feel better. This remedy, lachesis, has a very, very different energy. They can be angry, accusing. They will openly tell you that they're worse for alcohol. They're worse before the period. They're jealous. They're also talkative like pulsatilla, but they talk at you. So if you're ever feeling got at by a friend, you're just like backing away slightly because they're talking so much, you might be looking at the lachesis state. So they also get hot flushes and headaches like sepia. They can often have an increased libido. They're very intense. They might get a sore throat before the period, and they can get palpitations at menopause. So you can hear how our remedies look at different organs and systems. And then we have a remedy called folliculinum, which is actually made from a synthetic form of estrogen. We make remedies from many different sources. And this remedy has really come to the fore because we have so much synthetic estrogen in our timeline. So things like the morning after pill, the birth control pill, HRT itself, and of course, IVF. So the more we add these things into our lives, the more we eat foods which are rich in pesticides, so ultra-processed foods, that kind of thing, the more we need remedies like this, where we see this distortion of our cycle due to synthetic estrogen and things that mimic our estrogen. So this is an important concept that generally isn't being talked about. So besides homeopathy, I also do a lot of flower essences at menopause, and I've just back from Australia. And one of the biggest Australian bushflower essences for balancing our hormones at menopause, for nourishing the ovaries as they begin to lessen in their work, and for things like dry vagina, is an Australian bushflower essence called she oak. And on the right, this is one called yellow cowslip orchid. And this one is one for being a bit judgy, as my friend says, a bit judgmental, a bit, and that can come to the fore. We find ourselves being overcritical of others, and we just think, gosh, I wish I hadn't said that to someone. You know, a remedy, that's why I'm introducing these, because we can work with remedies, homeopathic remedies, and our flower essences at the mental emotional level. So she oak's included in the Australian bushflower essence called woman essence. So flower essences are used all over the world in all different cultures. They've been used for a very, very long time. There's evidence as far away as ancient Egypt that we use them. Hildegard of Bingen, who was an amazing polymath and abbess, used them. She recommended draping a cloth over flowers to capture the dew and the essence of the flower, and then putting that cloth onto the body part that flower part was, the flower essence and that flower was useful for. So there's very, very early evidence and all sorts of reasons which I teach about why Australian bushflower essences in particular are so potent. So I was really wowed and yeah, I just spent a whole month studying them last month because I really wanted to go in the spring and get to know the flower essences in person. So I mentioned the woman essence, very, very readily available, great for all sorts of deficiencies and excess in the female hormonal cycle. So it's balancing. We're thinking of it as what we call an adaptogen. And Sonia will tell you as well about adaptogenic herbs. These help balance our hormones. This term adaptogenic, if things are in excess or things are in deficiency, adaptogenic will bring it back into alignment. So this is a combination of several of the bushflower essences. There's another one, which I'm going to finish on, which is called Focus Essence. It used to be called Cognis Essence. This is fantastic for brain fog. And what I like about the flower essences is they can be used alongside other health choices. So, if you're on medication, if you're on homeopathy, if you're taking some herbs, you can pop these in. So this is great for focus. 7 drops in a glass of water while you work, or 7 drops AM and PM for a couple of weeks is usually enough. I have to remind a friend of mine that this is a great one for her. And that's what I mean about community. Community is about, reminding each other what we need, having a menopause roadmap, coming back to it. And these are a couple of ingredients in this particular flower essence for focus. Sundew, which is for kind of split focus, when you can't get your mind quite focused on something, and isopogon for memory recall. And studies show that this has helped people recall memory in dementia. Oh yes, I forgot. I was just going to do these. I really will finish on these, and then we'll take some questions. But essential oils, I thought I'd pop some of these in. These are material substances, so they're different from our homeopathy and our flower essences. And like herbs, they can have an action of blocking something that's going on in the body or enhancing the action of something in the body. So you might need to just check that there are no contraindications. I've mentioned ones here which generally don't have contraindications, although clary sage we wouldn't use when pregnant, for instance. But they have different actions, so we've got things like geranium, which is very low cost one, very calming. Lavender, which is soothing and calming. You could put these together in a little oil burner. Melissa is fantastic. It's for calming the mind, relieving agitation. So it's a great one to have as a herbal tea or an essential oil. And I think it's definitely in some of Sonia's mixes. It's anti-inflammatory. So if we've got an inflamed heat condition, it can be helpful. It's antiviral, lots and lots of properties of these plants. And I literally am going to finish on this slide next, coming up roses, because the latest study shows that continuous inhalation of rose essential oil on the grey matter of the brain was beneficial, i.e., rose oil expands your grey matter. How fabulous is that? So I want to say the future can look good. So over to you, Sonia. I know there's a few questions in the chat. I can see that.
Amazing. So lots of things in the chat where I've popped little links to things for people, but Claire has asked a question, and I was also given some questions in advance if we have time to cover some of those. So Claire asked, is the coil enough progesterone for somebody on estrogen, i.e. 2 pumps per day plus a vaginal twice a week? Progesterone made her sleepy in other forms, presumably, hence having the coil.
Yeah. Yes. So yes, but monitor your symptoms, because we're talking HRT here, and this is one of the most common combinations of HRT. So we've got a progesterone attached to the coil. It's called the Mirena coil, and it's meant to be very slow release. And then we've got estrogen in some form. Pumps, it's an estrogel. So what I would say is just to be aware that any synthetic hormone, so we talked about morning after pill, we talked about the pill, HRT, IVF, will mean that we become deficient in B vitamins, vitamin C, iodine, zinc, and magnesium. So these would be the things to, in somehow, add into your life when you're on HRT. And there's all sorts of ways you can do that. You can do that through food. You can go and look up those foods, look up those minerals and vitamins and see which foods are rich in those. You can take a supplement. You could look to the Hello Wellness herbs and look at the menopause mix, and definitely get in touch with Sonia and say which ones would suit me to make sure I have these in my life alongside my menopause choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Because herbs are our little unsung heroes, aren't they? We use something like nettles because
Yeah,
they
perfect.
give us
Yeah.
such amazing bioavailable magnesium and iron. Your body recognizes it and uses it in a much nicer and gentler way than taking a refined sort of supplement. So Tracy has popped in the chat and said, what about bioidentical HRT?
Yes. So there are two. So bioidentical HRT is supposed to be given based on your blood tests. And your blood test will be, hopefully, with a private practitioner. They will be broader than the blood tests that you get from a regular GP or MD. So you'll get a true hormonal profile, and that should include things like DHEA, testosterone, etc. And so what we're talking about with bioidentical is, how is your menopause for you right now, or how is your hormonal profile for you right now? I have women, I mentioned POI earlier, and so I might have women who have never had a balanced hormone profile, who are basically on a bioidentical HRT for the whole of their life, because that is not recognized very well by the mainstream medicine, tend to go private. And so they're then on bioidentical HRT, and you need regular blood readings to check that what you're taking is still, the bioidentical HRT is still right for you. So yes, we're talking about smaller amounts of synthetic hormones in your system that is bespoke, tailor-made to how your cycle is. The two problems that I see with bioidentical approach is women not having a regular check to see that what they're taking is still appropriate for them. So that's number one. And number two about bioidentical is, what you will see is mainstream medicine saying ours is great. Most people can't get bioidentical hormones, true bioidentical hormones, on based on their hormonal profile. Okay, this sort of happens, but there's not enough blood tests done by your GP for it to really happen. So bioidentical, there are two types of bioidentical hormones. There's bioidentical and body identical. And what you'll see is a conversation going on from mainstream medicine saying ours is okay, and that compounded body or bioidentical hormones are not okay. That's because, sorry, they are not earning money from compounded hormones. Your Harley Street doctor or your private doctor will be doing a profile, hopefully for you, based exactly on how your hormonal profile is, and giving you body identical hormones, which are compounded by a pharmacist who's fully trained, and they're basically the same types of medication. It's just one's coming from big pharma and one's coming from an independent compounding pharmacist. So I hope that makes sense. The actual conversation is really for you as a woman. Get regular blood tests. You're taking a smaller amount of HRT. It's attuned to exactly what you need. The one and final thing I'll say about that is what I see with a lot of women who've gone privately over the years, and remember, I've been prescribing for women for 25 years, is there has been a long tail history of women having too much of the testosterone and too much of the estrogen in that mix, and coming up with anxiety and sleep problems. No hot flushes, they're not gaining weight, but the fallout is anxiety and sleep problems, and that hopefully that's beginning to change. I'm not going to name names, but I know who the prescribers are, because women would fall out of Harley Street into my practice at Ainsworth's with terrible anxiety, looking fantastic because they're not gaining weight, and they're still as skinny as they were in their 20s. But I'm like, is this a good payoff? And when they let go of all of that, when they're through a natural menopause time, it all comes back into balance again.
Yeah, of course. Brilliant. Okay, another question from Nova. Nova says if we go on natural products to help our body produce estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone naturally long term, how long can we stay on them? Do we need to constantly assess things with blood tests like we would with bio, ID, HRT?
I think that's a really, really great question. And what I would say is to sort of come back to what I was saying at the beginning, thanks, Nova, and is to have that idea of a menopause roadmap, to identify what it is that your body tends to do, to understand what happens when you go through a period of stress, and to have your kind of tools ready, if you like, for that stress. It might be that you go through a period of stress and you're like, oh, I need to get back onto my magnesium. I need to take my ashwagandha before bedtime. I need to support myself better through the period of stress. So when I, talked about my client who'd said, she'd missed her periods with under stress, one of the things I might recommend to her is something like a combination herb with ashwagandha in to take during those times, to always top up her magnesium, because we utilize that all the time. And the same with testosterone. If you feel like you've got a lack of drive, a lack of energy, a lack of verve, you you finding goal setting, getting round to doing a project, it's like, oh, where's our testosterone for that? So it might be that we reach for whatever it is that's working for us to boost that. So I do think, when we look at I talked about permaculture as a background for me. We're surveying the scene, we're assessing what's needed, we're designing a plan, we're implementing a plan, and then every so often we need to evaluate it and tweak. So that is the acronym for that is called SADIMAT. Survey, how's your menopause, analyze what needs to be done, design. I don't know if any of you have ever booked an event with designmynight.com. It's a UK booking agency. And I always think designmymenopause.com. And then we implement it, we evaluate, and we tweak every so often. We maintain it. That's what the M is for, maintenance. And then we evaluate and tweak. What am I doing currently? Yeah, I did a mineral scan with a colleague, and it showed that I was a little deficient in zinc. And I thought that makes total sense. I can never eat oysters, sadly. I love oysters, can never eat them. And I have noticed that twice this year I've got a cold, and I don't normally get a cold, and zinc is one of our immune supporting minerals. So I'm taking zinc. That's my tweak. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool.
It makes complete sense. You're so right. I think, the priority is to really know ourselves, to try and use this phase as a time to prioritize knowing ourselves, knowing our needs, and knowing what works.
Totally.
But the amazing thing about these natural supports, so the homeopathics, the flower remedies, the herbal things, the getting your medicine from plants, all of those things, they work really quickly. If they don't work, they don't do anything. You can dip in and out. So, I take my Hello Menopause every day, but some days I need a bit of extra energy. So I take a different formula. Some days I want some of our Hello Brain, and they work straight away. It's not like with HRT where you've got a long period of adjusting. Is this helping? Is this not helping? If you have a toolkit of natural things, you've got great things to go for, and you learn what needs to be in there all the time, what's a non-negotiable, and what can be when it's needed. Just one final question, Caroline, because we are just slightly over time, and I'm sorry, you're a busy lady.
Right, that's fine.
But I had quite a lot of questions in advance, and the overwhelming theme is that women need help right now often, and really don't know where to start. It's an overwhelming amount of information. Everybody that you're hearing from is telling you that their way is the right way. Like, just any advice for people on where they should start and how they can start creating that roadmap and toolbox?
Yeah, it's great. I have a Facebook group, but it's become quite diffuse because it's got a lot of people in it. So the more intimate that space is, sorry, that is my door buzzing going off there. Do you mind if I just go and let them in? Can you just
Oh,
1 second?
absolutely. I'm going to pop on here what the name of Caroline's Facebook group so that you can look that up. This is her on Facebook, and she genuinely does pop up all the time answering people's questions. So it's a really, really great resource. And Caroline also has on her website, which I popped above, carolinegaskin.co.uk, lots of workshops that you can dip into, short sessions, little courses, all sorts of resources on her website, as well as the Facebook group.
So sorry, that is a package I'm waiting for a client. So yes, so I have a, what I feel about the Facebook group with nearly 5,000 people in it is a bit diffuse, and so you need something that you feel supported in, which is why we created the 6-week natural menopause course. And we are about to open up a menopause membership space, because again, that sense of being in community, being held, it's really important that you feel confident about the advice you're getting. And one of the problems that we have, it's a problem and a curse, is AI. So if we, do you know what the leading thing is with AI at the moment, which is great? It might be about to change, but at the moment is helping people manage relationship issues. How amazing is that? That its leading space is, how do I deal with this in terms of relationship and societal stuff? So that shows how much we want to be comfortably part of a group. So that's the kind of space that I think we need to be in. Check that where you're getting the information from is someone who's qualified, registered, insured, if they're a practitioner, that they haven't just done, a weekend workshop in menopause with a point of sale at the end of it. If that person, I have to field this in my Facebook group all the time. If that person's in there to sell a product, are they trained in that? Really look to the source, read the label. I should lead with that all the time. Always read the label. Who is it that's delivering the information? Have they got your best interests at heart? If you're buying a supplement, who's the CEO of the company, and what are they looking for? These are really important things. So I kind of kept that broad because, obviously I'm going to say, come join me, but there's lots of resources out there and there's a lot of amazing people. Interestingly, there's quite a lot of good stuff on LinkedIn, but check, as I say, qualified, registered, insured when it comes to therapies. How long someone been in business? One of the companies I've worked with has been in business 30 years. Sonia, I think you've been in business for a long time. Yeah. It counts. We're still in business.
It does. It really counts. And you're trying to find somebody that you resonate with, aren't you?
Yeah.
So we're really focused on our social media, which is Hello Wellness Herbs. It's often me pushing a wheelbarrow or chasing a chicken or just working in my office. I think it's really important to try and connect with sources of information that you feel like you could be friends with. And for lots of people, that's not what they want. They want like a nice laboratory setting, and that's not us. So find who fits for you, and ask friends where they're getting up good information from, and that kind of thing. And if you try something for a few weeks and it's not helping, stop. It's that's, you give it up and do something else. And really, really think about what's helping you. It's been so amazing, Caroline. We have to let
thank
you
you.
go. I hope we can do this again another time, because it's been
Sure.
just absolutely brilliant. Thank you everyone for joining us. I've popped, as I say, lots of resources in the chat that hopefully you can take away. We've got Caroline's amazing blog that she wrote for us on our website, on our blog page, and should just be able to signpost you to some good stuff, or message either of us, and we always do our best to help, even after 25 years, Caroline. I think mine's 24 actually. I think you're one ahead of me, but we'll We
Brilliant.
won't
Thank
worry about
you.
that. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Wonderful. Thanks, Caroline. Bye for now.
Bye.